Now, according to a landmark report, European Union countries are buying too much of their defence equipment from outside of the EU. Indeed, almost two-thirds of it comes from the United States. The report also outlines a failing to invest enough in joint military projects and warns of a possible dependence on China. Well, those findings were published today in that report by the former European Central Bank chief, Mario Draghi. And here to discuss its findings, Armen Georgian is with me now. And Armen, look, before we get into what Draghi is actually saying in this report, let's talk about the political context, because that matters here too.
Well, we're just at the start of a new 5-year mandate for the European Union. We had EU elections in June, so as a result of that election, the European Parliament has already been renewed. The European Commission is being formed as we speak. So this is one of the things that is intended to kind of give the new EU mandate a direction for these next 5 years. But we've already had things that are meant to do that same thing, Nadia. So we had, in recent months, Enrico Letta, former Italian Prime Minister. He produced a report on completing the EU single market. He talks about similar things to what Mario Draghi was talking about in this press conference today. We've also had the unveiling of the EU strategic agenda, which is a document that EU leaders themselves come up with, which happened at the end of July, if I remember rightly. And that also talks about very similar things, you know, how the EU has to become more geopolitically savvy in competing with China and the United States, how it has to make more of its innovation capacities, how it has to pursue its technological prowess vis-a-vis these other big powers. So all of these reports or publications, in a way, they've sort of gone in a broadly similar direction, I think.
And what about the tangible proposals then that Draghi is making now? Do you think that they'll be implemented? Well,
you mentioned the emphasis on investment. I think that's probably one of the things that he wanted to emphasize most, in particularly to finish the green transition, the technological transitions that we need. Let's take a listen to Mario Draghi talking about that question of investing in European key industries.
The needs that all this entails are massive. The investment share will have to rise by around 5 percentage points of GDP to levels last seen in the 60s and the 70s. I always like to make a comparison. The additional investment provided by the Marshall Plan between 48 and 51 amounted to 2% of GDP.
So he's talking about that massive investment program, the Marshall Plan, decades ago. But the question is there political appetite in the EU now for that kind of investment program? We've already had reactions, Nadia, from the German finance ministry and from the Dutch government, both saying, to boil it down, more joint borrowing is not the answer. And we've always had in the EU this sort of divide between the more frugally minded countries and those that are willing to spend more money. But I think the big question really is, where does the money come from? This massive investment, even if there was a political appetite for it, which I think is questionable, but even if there were, where is the money going to come from that Mario Draghi is talking about, this massive investment? If it's going to come from the private sector has to feel that there's a profit motive. Otherwise, there's no incentive for the private sector to spend the money, right, to make the investment. If it's kind of going to come from the private sector, how do you do that when the EU is also telling EU member states that they have to balance their budgets and be careful with spending? Remember, France right now, along with Belgium and several other EU countries, they're under a special excessive deficit surveillance procedure by the European Union. So how can the one hand is saying spend more money to compete with China and so on and be more technologically advanced, etc. The other hand is saying, yeah, but you've got a big budget deficit, watch out, don't spend too much money. So how does all that actually work out?
Huge questions then. Thanks very much, Armen Georgian.
Thank you.
For us there.